Hey everybody, we're going back to ancient America for a video, but first of all, I would like to say Happy Mother's Day to all the moms out there. Hope you have a great day. My brother and I are going over to my mom's and her husband a little later, after they get back from their usual Sunday morning run to the casino with their friends and the buffet. And I'm not usually up recording videos at 5:30 in the morning Sunday. I'm usually sleeping for a few more hours at least, but there was a loud pool party out there about 4 a.m. and it woke me up and I couldn't get back to sleep, and I went out there to kind of tell them to keep it down, and I ended up joining them for about an hour, and they got a sunrise ancient history talk. Some of the younger folks out there are subscribers of mine. Now, people that have just subbed my channel recently, last spring, I started making a comprehensive series on the sites in ancient America, and it really didn't stop for about 6 months. And we are going to go down to a site today that I wanted to do a video on, and it kind of slipped through the cracks, but I've done many videos in this area. We are going down to Marietta, Ohio, and this part of the world was full of ancient cities, mounds, and earthworks, and it spans a lot of time here. There was mounds and earthworks in the city, and we're just going to take a look here real quick at some old pics. Here's a drawing from the 1800s of the area that would become Marietta, Ohio. And the earthworks are depicted here in some mounds. Here is a survey done in 1837 of the Marietta Earthworks. You notice that there are earthworks and mounds, and there is henges in this area. Here we have some pyramid-type structures with 4 ramps leading up to these. This is what existed in Marietta, Ohio, and I think that was named after Marie Antoinette. Is that correct? Here's a drawing done in 1846 of the conical mound, what appears to be the earliest phase of the mound building here that could have stretched for over 2,000 years. Here's a diagram of one of the other mounds that was found here with ramps coming up each side, and this has been lost today, but maybe we can take a peek at where this was. Here's a drawing. I think this is from the late 1800s, and I will leave some links below, but you see the conical mound, and you see the ditch or the henge around it, and that's a very clear sign this comes from the Adena culture, which is really a big mystery. They built large earthworks, and they stretched across many miles in some areas of Ohio. Chillicothe, Ohio. Of course, we have Fort Ancient, Serpent Mound, the Newark Earthworks. Ohio is one big ancient mystery. With such vast earthworks, this must have been a huge culture, a huge population. We call them Adena because we have no clue who they were. They obviously had a name for themselves. This is Turin, Ohio, and I will leave the link below. It says the large conical mound is 30 feet high and is enclosed by a low circular wall and an interior ditch. Today, the large conical mound, named Conus, is the only intact surviving element of the Marietta Earthworks. This is Marietta, Ohio today, and this is kind of where the earthworks were. As a comparison here, this part of the city. Now we're going to go down and take a look at what remains today. But the thing that people have to remember about the mound builders is there are many different phases. We have Watson Break that goes back 5,500 years, Poverty Point maybe 3,500 years. We have mounds that were built 2,000 years ago, 1,000 years ago. But here is what remains today, and we've seen this before, a cemetery built on a sacred ancient site. Here is the large mound, and this appears to be an Adena mound, but it's right in the middle of the cemetery here. Is this unique? Well, a little bit. There is a henge around this, and I'll show you that in a second. But here's a look at the mound from another place on Street View, and you can get an idea of the henge that surrounds it. And this tells me this is pretty ancient as far as the mounds go in ancient America. Maybe 2,500 years old, and really all we have is guesses about this culture. We don't even know who they are, and they only maybe go back 2,500 years. All around the world we identify cultures, the Hittites, the Hyksos, the Phoenicians. We have a pretty good handle on who people were. These people, we haven't a clue. The Adena name comes from a farm where artifacts were found on in Ohio, kind of nearby here. It says the Marietta Earthworks also had 3 basic enclosures. The largest, on the north end of the complex, featured a rectangular enclosure what may have been a ceremonial walled pathway leading down to the Muskegum, and that is the river in the area. And ceremonial is the word that archaeologists use for they really don't know. Inside this enclosure were two massive elevated mounds that looked like platforms with ramps leading up to the top of each side. The larger truncated pyramid was named Quadrano, and the next largest was called Capitoleum. There were several other elevated platforms, but not as large. The Quadrano, illustrated left, was 180 feet long by 32 feet wide and 10 feet high. Midway on each side were graded ascents to reach the plateaued top. These grades were 25 feet wide and 65 feet long. The Capitoleum was constructed the same except smaller in size and with only 3 ramps. Although smaller in size, it had a more commanding view of the enclosure due to the lay of the land. Now it seems there are a few periods of construction here. It seems that Hopewell were here 1,000 years ago, and we can look back to 1,000 years ago and say that's lost history. But 1,000 years ago, they seem to be putting up these platform pyramids, maybe in honor of an original culture was here, and the Adena culture goes back in history maybe farther than we are led to believe. One thing seems to be sure, they were into sacred geometry and astronomy. But let's just read here. It says, the origin and disappearance of the prehistoric mound builders has long been shrouded in mystery. And I like that word, shrouded. Conus is the burial place of the chieftains. The mounds and earthworks were constructed between 800 BC and 700 AD. That's the window they give you. These early inhabitants were the first farmers and artisans in the Ohio Valley, and Marietta was the site of the mound builders' city. Marietta was founded on April 7, 1788, under the leadership of General Rufus Putnam for the Ohio Company of Associates. Many of the pioneers were officers and soldiers of the American Revolution who received land grants for military services. And if you look closely at this list of people buried in the cemetery here, a lot of colonels and majors. Here's a look at the ditch or the henge that surrounds it in the perfect circle. And these people certainly were into astronomy. This looks like the place in Indiana, Mounds Park. Maybe this got built in the time of Plato. Who knows? But people were buried here maybe 250 years ago, beginning with. But there was people buried here maybe 2,000 years ago, 2,500 years ago. Probably some large skeletons here in this unexcavated mound today. Now, if this place existed in the UK, would we have the same attitude towards it? A large mound, large earthwork, and henges? It's just weird that people look at these ruins in ancient America and kind of just have an apathetic, blasé attitude towards them. Do they really know the history? Do they want to know the history? Well, some people do. Now, they have some diagrams of these platform mounds that seem to come from maybe the Hopewell culture, and that's what we call it, just because we don't know who they are. Both the name Adena and Hopewell are modern names, and they come from archaeological sites, I think, in Chillicothe, Ohio. Totally modern names. But here on this diagram, where these platform mounds are, well, do they still exist today? Not really, but kind of. Let's go take a look. Here we are down at Street View. Where is this mound today? It's under the library here. This is all that remains of the mound. You can clearly see it here today. They just plopped a library down on top of it. Do people know the history here? This was a sacred mound from a culture that put probably thousands of hours into building this structure. It had ramps. Some of them, it appears, leading off to solstice markers. Today, library on top of it. But this city of Marietta was just one of the sites in Ohio. It was covered with mounds, ancient earthworks, and a big mystery. I will leave links below to my videos on the Newark Earthworks, the Fort Ancient site, the Chillicothe site, and also the Portsmouth Earthworks. Ohio is just a vast site of ancient ruins. But this ancient Adena mound appeared to be a very sacred site. The Hopewell came along, and they seemed to build right by it, maybe as an homage to it, and probably buried their dead nearby. Then 250 years ago, early Americans buried their dead nearby. These ancient sites were treated differently in every area of the country. But the story here, the early Adena mound builders, I think it's a true mystery. Where did these people come from? Where did they originate? We have mounds that go back a couple thousand years prior to the Adena. What the heck was that culture? Ancient America, one big, huge mystery. But that might have been the earliest video I've ever done. Happy Mother's Day to all you moms out there, and you all have a very nice day.